The sound of that slap was so loud it froze everyone. It wasn't just an act of violence. It was the collapse of authority, morality, and control in one instant. Sergeant Derek Harlan, a decorated white police officer with 18 years on the force, had just slapped a sitting black judge, Elijah Thompson, across the face, right there in open court. A gasp ran through the room. The bailiff froze. Lawyers dropped their pens. 13-year-old Maya Jenkins, the frightened black girl at the center of the case, burst into tears. Her mother screamed her name, but Judge Thompson didn't flinch. He slowly adjusted his glasses, straightened his robe, and said calmly, "Record that. Every second of it." His voice didn't rise, but it carried power, an authority that could not be broken. Before going into the story, if you're watching this now, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and tell me where you're watching from, because this is not just a story about a slap. It's about the moment when truth strikes back harder than any hand ever could. That morning, Judge Elijah Thompson had walked into his courtroom with the same quiet determination he'd carried for 25 years on the bench. He'd seen anger, arrogance, and injustice in many forms. But what was about to unfold would test everything he believed about fairness. The case on his docket seemed simple at first. A 13-year-old black girl named Maya Jenkins, accused of resisting authority at a South Side bus stop. The officer who charged her was Sergeant Derek Harlan, a man with a long record of arrests, 65 in the last 4 years, most of them targeting black teenagers. Thompson had reviewed the file the night before, feeling a familiar heaviness in his chest. His father had been beaten by police in 1985 when Elijah was just a boy. That memory never left him, and every case like this reopened the wound. When Harlan entered the courtroom, his arrogance filled the space. He walked with a smirk, glancing at Maya like she was beneath him. "This one thinks she's above the law," he said loudly, ignoring the judge's presence. The words made Thompson's jaw tighten. Maya sat small in her chair, hands clasped together, trembling. Her mother, Lena, sat beside her, glaring at Harlan with exhausted fury. "She's a child," Lena said softly, "not a threat." Harlan turned to her, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then teach your child to respect authority." The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and cold. "Sergeant," Thompson said firmly, "you will not speak to her that way in my courtroom." Harlan looked up at him, unbothered. "I'm just stating facts, Your Honor. You can't fix what's broken in this city." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Maybe not, but I can expose what's poisoning it." He opened the case file. 65 arrests in 4 years. He began slowly, and over 90% of them are black children. "Does that seem balanced to you, Sergeant?" Harlan folded his arms. "I go where the crime is, or where you think it is," Thompson replied. The room fell silent. Even the court clerk, Alex Rivera, stopped typing. Lena's hand tightened around her daughter's. The tension was thick enough to feel. Harlan laughed quietly. "You think you're going to make an example out of me, Judge? I've been on the streets while you sit up there in your robe pretending you understand." Thompson didn't blink. "I understand power, Sergeant, and I understand abuse." Harlan leaned forward slightly, voice low and taunting. "You've always been soft. I've read about your rulings. You let criminals walk because you're afraid of being called racist." Thompson met his gaze. "Justice isn't fear, it's conscience. And yours is missing." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Harlan stepped closer to the bench. "You don't know what it's like to put your life on the line every day." Thompson's voice stayed calm. "You don't know what it's like to be a black father explaining to his son why men like you walk free after killing boys who look like him." That hit Harlan hard. His eyes burned. His fists tightened. For a moment, even he seemed to realize how far he'd gone. but his pride wouldn't let him stop. Maya spoke softly, her voice trembling. "Judge Thompson, I didn't do anything." He grabbed me because I looked up. Thompson nodded gently. "I believe you." "Maya," Harlan snapped. "She's lying. They always lie." Lena stood up, trembling with rage. "You humiliated my daughter in front of strangers. You called her a criminal because she acted like one." Harlan shot back. "She refused a lawful order." "To bow her head?" Lena shouted. "She's a child." The gavel struck again. "Enough," Thompson said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of thunder. "Sergeant, I will not allow this courtroom to become another stage for your prejudice." Rivera, the clerk, quietly slid a folded note toward the judge. Thompson unfolded it under the desk. It read in shaky letters, "Back off, or you're next." He looked up, emotionless, and tucked it beneath his folder. "Tell me, Sergeant," he said, voice steady, "when did protecting people turn into punishing them?" Harlan laughed bitterly. "You wouldn't last a day in my shoes." "Maybe," Thompson said, "but at least I wouldn't trample children to feel tall." That was when Harlan snapped. "You think you can sit there in your black robe and talk down to me?" he shouted, stepping closer. The bailiff moved, but Thompson raised his hand, signaling him to stop. "You're out of line," the judge warned. Harlan sneered. "You're not a judge. You're an activist in a robe." Thompson's eyes were calm. "And you're a coward in a badge." In that instant, the line broke. Harlan lunged forward and slapped him, hard. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Gasps filled the room. Lena screamed. Maya began crying. Rivera froze behind his desk, fingers trembling over the keyboard. Harlan's chest heaved, his hand shaking from what he'd just done. Thompson didn't move. He stood there, face red from the blow. But his eyes didn't break. When he finally spoke, his voice was clear, unwavering, and devastatingly calm. "Bailiff," he said, "make sure that assault is entered into the record." Harlan's expression changed from defiance to fear. The weight of what he had done began to sink in. He looked around the room and saw every pair of eyes locked on him. Witnesses, journalists, and cameras. Thompson adjusted his glasses, never raising his voice. "You've just ended your career, Sergeant, and you've proven every word I've said." The bailiff moved to restrain Harlan, but Thompson held up a hand. "No. Let him stand there. Let the world see what arrogance looks like when it runs out of power." The room stayed silent. Even Harlan's breath seemed to vanish. Thompson turned to Maya. "You didn't bow your head," he said softly, "and neither will I." At that moment, everyone in the room knew something bigger had happened. It wasn't just an assault. It was a revelation. The story of a city's corruption had just found its face. And as Judge Elijah Thompson stood tall with a burning cheek but an unbroken spirit, the people in that courtroom realized they weren't witnessing a scandal. They were witnessing the birth of justice. The day after the slap, the courthouse was no longer just a place of law. It had become a battlefield of truth. The video of Sergeant Harlan striking Judge Elijah Thompson had spread across every news station in Chicago. Some called it the crack heard around the country. Protesters gathered outside demanding justice, while inside, Thompson quietly resumed court, determined not to let chaos dictate his next move. He sat behind the bench, composed but deliberate, his cheek still faintly bruised. Every word that left his mouth now carried the weight of an entire city watching. "Court is in session," he said softly. "We will continue where we left off." The crowd hushed, and for the first time, Harlan sat as a witness, not a man in control. Thompson began with precision. "Sergeant Harlan," he said, his voice calm but cutting, "you've served 18 years in law enforcement. During that time, your record shows 65 arrests involving minors. Do you know how many of those were black?" Harlan avoided eye contact. "I don't count by color. Your Honor, Thompson raised an eyebrow. Then allow me to do the counting for you. 90%? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Tell me, Sergeant, Thompson continued, is that coincidence or pattern? Harlan shifted uncomfortably. I go where the crime is, and yet. Thompson pressed. Somehow, crime always looks the same color to you. The tension grew heavier by the second. Reporters leaned forward. The clerk, Alex Rivera, kept typing, his fingers shaking slightly as he sensed what was coming. Harlan tried to regain control. Your Honor, with respect, I've been doing this job long enough to know who's trouble. I don't need statistics to tell me what I see every day. Thompson leaned back, eyes steady. And what exactly do you see? Sergeant? Disrespect. Harlan snapped. Lack of discipline. Kids who think they can mouth off to officers and walk away. Lena Jenkins, sitting in the front row beside Maya. Couldn't hold it in any longer. You mean kids like my daughter? She said, her voice trembling but strong. You called her defiant because she didn't look down. She's 13. She was scared. Harlan turned toward her, irritation flashing in his eyes. Ma'am, I don't owe your child special treatment. Thompson's voice broke the tension. You owe every citizen equal treatment. Sergeant, that's the law you swore to uphold. The air in the room shifted. Harlan's arrogance clashed against Thompson's quiet authority, each sentence feeling like a duel between justice and bias. You don't understand what it's like out there, Harlan said bitterly. You sit behind this bench and judge us. But we're the ones in the dirt, fighting chaos, Thompson replied evenly. I understand more than you think. My father died in that same dirt because of men who believed what you just said. The words struck deep. For a moment. Harlan said nothing. His jaw tightened, but his silence spoke volumes. From the side table, Rivera cleared his throat. Your Honor, permission to submit new evidence. Thompson nodded. Rivera handed over a thin folder. A report analyzing Harlan's arrests. Each page revealed identical language. Resisting authority, non-compliance, verbal defiance. Thompson skimmed the list, then looked up. Sergeant, every one of these reports uses the same words, the same justification. Do you realize how that sounds? Standard procedure. Harlan muttered. No, Thompson said, his tone sharpening. It sounds like prejudice dressed as protocol. Ryan Patel, a journalist seated quietly in the back, scribbled furiously in his notepad. He'd been following the case from day one and sensed the tremor building. His article that morning had already stirred protests across the city, accusing the department of systemic bias. Now, as Thompson's questions grew sharper, Patel's phone buzzed, a text from his editor. Keep recording. This is history. Patel looked up, camera discreetly rolling. Thompson continued. You claim to protect the community, but how does humiliating children protect anyone? Harlan's temper broke. I do what's necessary. You think these kids are innocent? They grow up disrespecting law, ignoring orders. Someone's got to teach them. Thompson's eyes narrowed. And you think violence is a teacher? Sometimes it's the only language they understand. Harlan replied. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Thompson struck the gavel. Order. His gaze pierced through the noise. That language, he said firmly, is exactly what destroys trust. You don't correct ignorance with cruelty. Lena's voice trembled but carried strength. He didn't just arrest Maya. He grabbed her arm, shoved her against a wall, and called her another lost cause. My daughter hasn't slept since. Maya hid her face, shaking. Thompson's voice softened. No child should be treated that way, especially not by someone sworn to protect. He turned to Harlan. Do you deny that? Sergeant? Harlan stared at the table. I did my job. You abused your power, Thompson countered. And now you'll answer for it." The silence stretched long and tense. Then, in a voice laced with bitterness, Harlan said, "You judges love to make examples out of good cops. Maybe you should look at what your community's doing instead of blaming us for cleaning it up." Thompson's expression didn't change, but his words landed with quiet force. "My community," he said slowly, "is this entire city, and it's tired of being cleaned up. It wants to be heard." At that moment, Chief Victor Kane entered the courtroom. He was tall, polished, and confident, the kind of man who believed politics could bury truth. "Your Honor," Kane began, "Sergeant Harlan has served with distinction. I advise we don't turn this into a circus." Thompson looked at him steadily. "Then perhaps your department should stop performing." The chief's jaw tightened. "Be careful. Judge, this case has already drawn too much attention." "Good," Thompson replied. "Maybe the attention will finally make someone listen." Outside, Patel's live update hit social media. Chicago judge confronts racist cop in open court. Crowd cheers as truth unfolds. Within hours, the video reached thousands. Protesters began chanting Harlan's name, demanding his badge. Kane noticed the tension building and whispered something to Harlan. But Thompson interrupted. "Don't bother coaching him. Chief, his truth doesn't need rehearsal. It needs repentance." The atmosphere burned with unspoken truths. Every eye was on Harlan, every word a mirror reflecting his character. He straightened, his pride bleeding into defiance. "I'm not the villain here. I did what I had to do. You people twist everything into race." Thompson leaned forward. "And you think slapping a judge proves otherwise?" Harlan froze. For once, he had no words. The hearing ended with Thompson's quiet command. "This court will continue tomorrow. Sergeant Harlan, you are ordered to remain available for questioning. You're not dismissed. You're accountable." The gavel struck once. Harlan stormed out, his face tight with rage, as the crowd filed out. Lena touched Thompson's hand and whispered, "Thank you for seeing us." He gave a small nod. "Justice isn't charity. Ms. Jenkins, it's a duty." Outside, chants grew louder. Reporters surrounded Kane, demanding answers. Patel's story went viral by evening. Chicago was split. Some defending Harlan as a hero cop, others calling for his arrest. Inside his office, Thompson sat alone, rereading the threat note. "Back off, or you're next." He folded it neatly, placed it in his drawer, and whispered to himself, "I'm not backing off." That night, he knew this was no longer just a courtroom dispute. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would either break him or remake the city. By the third day, the courthouse felt less like a hall of justice and more like a confession room for the entire city. The story had exploded nationwide. News anchors replayed the footage of Sergeant Harlan's slap every hour. While civil rights groups demanded his arrest, Judge Elijah Thompson refused to seek attention or sympathy. He focused only on the truth buried behind years of silence. "Bring in the next witness," he said quietly that morning. His voice carried authority, but his eyes revealed the exhaustion of a man fighting ghosts, his own and the city's. Alex Rivera, the court clerk, approached the bench carrying a small brown envelope. "Your Honor," he said, "we received new material overnight. Evidence tied to a prior case involving Sergeant Harlan." Thompson's eyes lifted. "Explain." Rivera hesitated. "It's from a young boy named Malik Carter." A murmur passed through the courtroom. Lena Jenkins turned to her daughter Maya, whispering, "That's the family from the South Side, the one who lost their son." Malik Carter stepped forward, small and nervous, clutching a worn leather notebook. He couldn't have been more than 14. "Your Honor," he began, voice trembling, "this belonged to my brother Jamal." Thompson nodded gently. Tell us about him. Malik swallowed hard. He was 16 when Sergeant Harlan shot him. It was 2 years ago. They said he resisted, but he didn't. He just went to buy a soda. The room went still. Harlan shifted in his chair, eyes cold, expression unreadable. Malik opened the notebook and read. He wrote here that Harlan told him once. You keep talking like that, and I'll make sure your mama buries you next. Gasps filled the air. Thompson leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp. Sergeant, were you ever questioned about this incident? Harlan's jaw tightened. Cleared of all charges. Internal review said justified force. Thompson didn't look away. Internal review isn't the same as justice. He turned back to Malik. Why bring this now? The boy's lip quivered. Because I saw the video. Sir, you didn't hit him back. My mom said that's what strength looks like. She told me Jamal would have wanted you to have this. Rivera's hands shook as he took the notebook and placed it on the record. Thompson's expression softened for the first time that week. Thank you, son. Your courage means more than you know. Malik nodded, wiping his tears. Harlan suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. He barked. You're letting children testify about things they don't understand. Thompson's tone was firm. Sit down, Sergeant. He's lying. Harlan continued. That kid's family has been after me for years. Because you killed their son, Thompson said, voice calm but cutting. The gallery murmured, reporters scribbled furiously. Harlan glared at Thompson. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? You want to make me your symbol. Thompson leaned back, unbothered. You made yourself the symbol. Sergeant, I'm just shining light on what you built in the dark. Rivera, pale but resolute, stood and said, Your Honor, there's something else. I need to speak under oath. Thompson nodded. Proceed. Rivera took a breath. Yesterday, after court, Sergeant Harlan approached me in the parking lot. He told me to lose the Carter file or I'd regret it. The crowd erupted. Harlan turned red. He's lying. Rivera raised his voice, trembling but determined. He offered me money, $5,000, to delete the file from the court system. Thompson's hand gripped the gavel. Sergeant, did you attempt to bribe a court official? No, Harlan shouted. He's twisting my words. Your words don't need twisting, Thompson replied. They bend on their own. The chief prosecutor, sitting behind the state's table, whispered to her assistant. We have him. But Thompson wasn't celebrating. His mind drifted back to 1985, to the memory of his father on the ground, his mother screaming for help, police officers laughing as a young Elijah watched helplessly from the curb. That memory was what drove him to law school, to the bench, to this moment. He blinked, pulled back to the present, and looked straight at Harlan. You said something earlier. Sergeant, that kids like Maya and Jamal don't respect authority. Tell me, what kind of authority deserves respect when it targets children? Harlan's face twisted in anger. You're twisting this into race again! Thompson's voice didn't rise. You turned it into race the moment you decided whose lives were worth protecting. At the back of the room, Lena Jenkins wiped her tears, whispering to Maya. That man's fighting for all of us. Maya looked up at the judge and whispered back. He reminds me of Grandpa. The words hit Lena harder than she expected. Ryan Patel, the journalist, streamed the hearing live for the Chicago Herald. His editor messaged him. This is bigger than local news. Keep rolling. Patel adjusted his mic and asked during recess. Judge Thompson, are you aware your inquiry could trigger a federal investigation? Thompson replied quietly. Then let it, if the truth offends power. Maybe power should be offended more often. Patel's clip went viral within hours. When court resumed, Rivera submitted one last piece of evidence, an internal email thread between Harlan and Chief Kane. The messages referenced keeping the numbers up and cleaning the streets before the next audit. Thompson read it silently, his jaw tightening, cleaning the streets. He repeated softly, "That's what you call it when you ruin young lives?" Harlan stayed silent, eyes darting toward the back, where Kane stood watching from the doorway, his face pale but unrepentant. The session ended quietly, without verdict or declaration, as the bailiff dismissed the court. Thompson gathered the files and slipped the threat note back into his pocket. On his way out, he paused beside Malik, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Your brother's words will matter now." Malik looked up through tears. "Promise?" "I promise," Thompson said. Outside, as cameras flashed and chants echoed through the streets, Harlan brushed past Rivera, muttering, "You'll regret crossing me." Rivera didn't answer. He simply looked him in the eye and said, "I already did once. Never again." That night, Thompson sat alone in his office, replaying the testimonies in his mind. He realized something profound. This case was no longer about a slap or a single officer's arrogance. It was about decades of silence breaking open all at once. And deep down, he knew the worst was still coming. Because men like Harlan never fell quietly. They dragged everything down with them. But this time, Elijah Thompson was ready to face it all. He had nothing left to lose but fear itself. When the courtroom reconvened the next morning, the crowd was larger, the air heavier, and the tension sharper than ever. The city had split in two overnight, half demanding justice for Judge Thompson, half defending Sergeant Harlan as a cop pushed too far. Reporters filled every seat, cameras lined the back wall, and even federal observers had shown up. But Thompson wasn't performing for the cameras. He sat in silence, calm and deliberate, waiting for the one piece of evidence that could shatter every lie that had held Chicago's police shield together for years. He turned to the clerk. "Mr. Rivera," he said quietly. "Play the audio." The speakers crackled to life. Harlan's voice came first, smug, confident, unmistakable. "You gotta keep these kids in line," he said on the recording. "They don't fear the badge anymore." Then came another voice, deeper, older, measured. It was Chief Victor Kane. "Handle it however you need to. Numbers matter more than noise. The brass wants results." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Thompson didn't look away from Harlan, whose face had turned pale. Kane shifted uncomfortably in his chair, pretending to stay composed. "Your Honor," Kane started. "That audio is taken out of context." Thompson's voice was steady. "The context," he said, "is corruption, and it's loud enough for the whole city to hear." The recording continued. Harlan's tone turned arrogant. "I don't care what they call it. If they don't listen, I'll make them listen." Kane's laughter followed. "Good. Keep them afraid. That's how you keep control." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Lena Jenkins held her daughter's hand tighter. Rivera's eyes darted toward Thompson, waiting for his cue. The judge leaned forward, his words precise and deliberate. "Sergeant Harlan," he said, "do you deny that this is your voice?" Harlan's throat tightened. That's a private conversation. It wasn't meant for court." "Private?" Thompson repeated. "When you speak about breaking the very oath you swore to uphold, privacy ends where the public's right to truth begins." Kane rose from his seat, trying to take control. "Your Honor, I object. This evidence was obtained illegally." Thompson's eyes flashed. "Sit down, Chief. The law applies even to those who think they own it." For the first time. Kane sat speechless. The bailiff moved closer. Sensing where this might lead, Thompson turned his attention back to Harlan. "You've justified violence as discipline, prejudice as protection, and arrogance as duty. Tell me, Sergeant, what does justice mean to you?" Harlan clenched his fists. "It means survival. Out there. You either control the streets or they control you. Thompson's voice stayed calm. Then you were never serving the people. You were serving your fear. The silence that followed was unbearable. Harlan's breathing grew heavy. Kane muttered under his breath. But the microphone caught it. He's finished either way. Thompson heard it. You're right, he said, staring directly at the chief. He is finished, and so are you. At that moment, Rivera pulled out another device. Your Honor, there's more. Thompson nodded. The second recording began, this time captured by Officer James Carter, Harlan's longtime partner. Harlan's voice came through again, mocking and cruel. These kids need to learn who's boss. You treat them soft. They'll walk all over you. Then James's voice responded, shaky but audible. You can't keep doing this. Derek, one day it's gonna blow up. Let it, Harlan sneered. The courts are on our side. The recording ended. The crowd gasped again. Harlan's wife, Clara, who had sat silently in the second row, stood abruptly, tears streaming down her face. Is that who you are? She shouted. That's what you've been hiding all these years? Harlan's son Ethan covered his face, refusing to look at his father. Harlan turned toward them, his voice breaking. Clara, I did it for the job, for us. She shook her head. You did it for your ego. You made our name a curse. The bailiff moved closer to calm her, but Thompson raised a hand. Let her speak. Truth deserves its voice. Clara's next words sliced through the room. You used to tell Ethan that justice mattered. What will you tell him now? That hate does? She turned and walked out. Ethan followed without a word. Thompson waited until the door closed, then looked at Harlan again. You've lost more than a case today. Sergeant, you've lost the mask. Harlan's voice rose, desperate. You don't know what it's like. You sit up there judging me. But this city's a war zone. We're all just trying to survive. No, Thompson said quietly. You were trying to dominate. There's a difference. Kane suddenly stood again. Your Honor, this trial has become personal. You're making it about race, emotion, and politics. Thompson turned toward him slowly. It became personal the moment your department chose silence over accountability. It became political when you taught officers that fear was policy. And it became racial the day children like Maya Jenkins learned to fear the very people meant to protect them. The room erupted in applause before the bailiff restored order. Harlan slammed his fist against the table. You think you're better than me? You think your robe makes you a god? Thompson didn't move. No. Sergeant, it makes me accountable to one. The tension snapped. Harlan's rage boiled over. You humiliated me. You've destroyed my life, he shouted, stepping forward. You don't get to lecture me on justice. He crossed the line between the table and the bench, his face twisted in fury. The bailiff shouted, Sergeant, step back. But Harlan didn't hear. You think you can talk to me like that? He roared. And then, once again, in front of hundreds, he raised his hand and slapped the judge across the face a second time. The sound was deafening. The entire courtroom stood in shock. Reporters dropped their cameras. Rivera gasped. Lena cried out. Harlan froze, realizing what he'd done. Again. Thompson's head tilted slightly from the blow, but when he looked back up, his eyes were calm, almost pitying. Record it, he said softly, just as before. Every second. The bailiff and two deputies rushed forward, grabbing Harlan by the arms. He struggled violently, shouting, This is a setup. You're all part of it. Thompson didn't raise his voice. Take him into custody, he ordered. Charge him with contempt and assault. Harlan tried to twist free, screaming, You're destroying me! Thompson looked at him with quiet finality. No. Sergeant, you destroyed yourself, as they dragged him away. Kane stood frozen, realizing the cameras had captured everything, his words, his complicity, his silence. Thompson turned to Rivera. "Send copies of both recordings to the U.S. Attorney's Office, effective immediately." Rivera nodded, his voice shaking. "Yes, Your Honor." When the noise finally settled, Thompson stood, rubbing the red mark on his face. "Let this record show," he said slowly, "that violence is the last refuge of a man exposed by truth." His words echoed long after the gavel struck, as Harlan disappeared through the courtroom doors in handcuffs. The audience stood, not in celebration, but in awe, because in that one moment, the balance of power had shifted. The badge no longer ruled the bench, and for the first time in years, Chicago felt the tremor of justice waking up. By dawn the next morning, the slap wasn't just a courtroom scandal, it had become a national reckoning. News networks ran it non-stop. Sergeant Harlan assaults black judge during trial. Streets filled with protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for the South Side and no one is above the law." Crowds swelled outside Cook County Courthouse, shouting for Harlan's arrest, for Kane's resignation, for the truth that had been buried under decades of silence. Judge Elijah Thompson arrived early, escorted by 2 federal marshals, but his expression was calm as ever. "Let them shout," he told them quietly. "They're not angry at justice. They're angry at those who betrayed it." Inside, the courtroom filled to capacity once more, and this time, the air felt different. Heavier, yes, but somehow cleaner, because everyone knew this day would decide whether corruption ruled the city or fell under its own weight. The hearing resumed. Thompson opened the session with firm authority. "This court will now address the matter of assault, obstruction, and civil rights violations by Sergeant Derek Harlan." He turned to the defense table. Empty. Harlan wasn't there. His lawyer looked uneasy. "Your Honor, my client is currently unavailable for testimony." Thompson's gaze sharpened. Unavailable. Or hiding. The lawyer hesitated. "Sergeant Harlan left his residence early this morning. His whereabouts are unknown." Murmurs erupted across the room. Rivera whispered something to an aide, who quickly left to inform security. Thompson struck the gavel once. "Issue a federal warrant, effective immediately, within minutes." FBI agent Laura Reyes entered the courtroom, her tone professional but urgent. "Judge Thompson," she said, "we've located Harlan's vehicle near South Kedzie Avenue. He's on the move, attempting to flee." Gasps filled the room. Lena Jenkins clutched Maya's hand. Thompson's voice stayed steady. "Then stop him. And do it by the book." Reyes nodded and left, her team already in pursuit. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, thousands had gathered: students, mothers, retired officers, veterans, and clergy. News vans surrounded the block. Ryan Patel, the journalist who had covered the case from day one, stood on the courthouse steps broadcasting live. What began as a small hearing about a young girl's false arrest has exploded into one of the most significant corruption cases in Chicago's history, he said. Federal agents are now pursuing Sergeant Derek Harlan, who faces charges of assaulting a judge and obstruction of justice. Behind him, chants grew louder. "Justice for Maya! Justice for Jamal!" Back inside, Thompson continued the proceedings with deliberate precision. "We will not allow fear to stall justice," he declared. Rivera handed him an affidavit confirming the audio recording's authenticity. Kane shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His usual confidence was gone. Sweat beaded at his temple. Thompson addressed him directly. "Chief Kane, you were recorded endorsing systemic abuse and concealment. Do you wish to deny your words before this court?" Kane swallowed hard. Those conversations were misinterpreted. "Then explain this line," Thompson said, reading from the transcript. "Keep the numbers up. The brass wants results." "What results? Chief? Quotas? Arrests? Or fear?" Kane stammered. "Public safety statistics. Those." Those were departmental goals. You mean political goals. Thompson corrected him coldly. Justice isn't a number. Chief, it's a responsibility. As the questioning continued, Agent Reyes returned, this time with urgency in her stride. Your Honor, she announced, Harlan has been apprehended. He attempted to cross state lines through Indiana. We have him in custody. The entire courtroom exhaled at once. Bring him in, Thompson said quietly. Moments later, the doors swung open. Harlan entered, flanked by agents. His wrists were in cuffs, his uniform disheveled, his face hollow with rage and exhaustion. The crowd erupted in mixed cries, some of triumph, others of disbelief. Thompson raised his hand. Order. The room fell silent. He looked at Harlan. Sergeant, you stand before this court not as an officer, but as a citizen accountable for his choices. Do you have anything to say before the record proceeds? Harlan's voice cracked, his arrogance stripped away. This city turned its back on me. You all did. I gave my life to this job. Thompson's reply came calm and steady. And in giving your life to the job, you forgot how to serve the people. That's not sacrifice, it's corruption. Harlan glared, eyes full of resentment. You think you've won? Judge, this changes nothing. They'll replace me with another just like me. Thompson nodded slowly. Then we'll expose the next one. 2. Outside. The tension reached its peak. The crowd, hearing news of the arrest, began cheering wildly. But not all cheers were peaceful. A group of uniformed officers loyal to Kane arrived to maintain order, pushing back demonstrators. The air crackled with confrontation. Lena Jenkins, standing near the front, shouted through a megaphone, "We don't fight hate with hate. Stand your ground, but stay peaceful." Yet as the police line advanced, someone threw a bottle, then another. Panic rippled through the crowd. A young man fell. Cameras caught everything. Agent Reyes, seeing the footage stream on her tablet, turned to Thompson. It's escalating. Sir. Thompson stood from the bench. Then I'm going out there. Rivera tried to stop him. Your Honor, that's not safe. Thompson shook his head. Justice isn't safe. It's necessary. He walked through the courtroom doors, past the guards, and stepped into the roaring noise of the streets. Cameras swarmed him instantly. He raised both hands, not to command, but to calm. Listen to me, he shouted over the crowd. This city has been broken by fear long enough. Today is not about vengeance, it's about accountability. Justice doesn't need chaos to prove itself. The crowd slowly quieted. Even the officers hesitated. Lena stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Thank you. Judge, she said softly. Thompson nodded. We'll change this city, but not by burning it down. We'll change it by standing tall. Back inside. Agent Reyes took charge. Sergeant Harlan, she said, reading from a warrant. You are under arrest for assault, obstruction of justice, bribery, and violation of civil rights under federal law. Harlan's head dropped. You have the right to remain silent. Reyes continued. When she finished, she turned to Thompson. We'll handle it from here. Your Honor. He gave a quiet nod. Make sure the people see this. The same people who thought power was untouchable. As Harlan was escorted out, he turned one last time toward Thompson. You think you saved them? You didn't save anyone. You just made me a martyr. Thompson looked at him steadily. You're not a martyr. Sergeant, you're a warning. Hours later. As night fell, Patel's live report reached millions nationwide. His words echoed over the crowd still gathered outside. Tonight, justice walked out of the courthouse and faced the people. A corrupt system cracked, and from that fracture, something new began to grow in homes across America. Families watched and wept, not because it was over, but because for once, it felt like justice might finally have a voice again inside his quiet chambers. Thompson sat down, removed his robe, and stared at his reflection in the darkened window. His cheek still bore the faint mark of violence, but his eyes carried something deeper. Resolve. Rivera entered, hesitant. "Sir, the city's calmer now. It won't last," Thompson said softly. "Real change never starts calm." He looked toward the courthouse doors where the echoes of protest still lingered. "But tonight," he whispered. Truth finally spoke louder than fear, and for the first time in years. Elijah Thompson believed the system could heal, if people were brave enough to keep fighting for it. In the weeks that followed, Chicago felt like a city caught between ruin and rebirth. The slap, the arrest, the recordings, every detail had been dissected on television, radio, and social media. But for Judge Elijah Thompson, none of it felt like victory. He had not sought fame. He had sought accountability. Yet now, his face appeared on magazine covers with headlines calling him the man who made the system bleed. He ignored them all. Justice, he told his clerk, Alex Rivera, isn't about headlines. It's about habits. If we don't change the way people think, the story dies the moment the cameras turn away. That morning, as he walked into court, protesters still gathered outside, not in rage this time, but in solidarity. They held signs that read, "Do the right thing, Chicago." It was the first time in decades the courthouse steps had felt like a place of hope rather than despair. Sergeant Derek Harlan was now behind bars at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, awaiting federal sentencing. When the trial concluded, the jury deliberated less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts: assault on a federal officer, obstruction of justice, bribery, and violation of civil rights. The judge who presided over Harlan's case was not Elijah Thompson, but a visiting federal magistrate. During sentencing, Harlan stood expressionless, his uniform replaced by a prison jumpsuit. "You had authority," the judge said sternly, "and you used it to dehumanize. The law you abused will now hold you." The gavel fell. Life without parole. Cameras flashed. But Harlan didn't blink. Only when his wife Clara spoke from the gallery did his composure break. "You destroyed everything good that ever touched your life," she said, tears in her voice. "Even your own son can't look at you anymore." Harlan looked toward Ethan, now standing beside her, his face cold, distant. "You're not my father," Ethan whispered. "You're just a man in a uniform who forgot how to be human." That single sentence became a headline across the country. Chief Victor Kane was next, once untouchable, now cornered. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed charges of conspiracy and evidence tampering. During the press conference, Agent Laura Reyes spoke plainly. Corruption survives in silence. What happened in Chicago isn't just one bad cop. It's a system that protected him. Reporters asked if Thompson had been involved in the federal push. Reyes answered simply. He didn't request it. He inspired it. Within a week, Kane was fired, and more than 150 officers were placed under internal investigation. 37 resigned outright. The police union issued a formal apology, but the public wasn't interested in apologies anymore. They wanted reform. City council meetings overflowed with citizens demanding change. The mayor, under immense pressure, approved a sweeping set of reforms known as the South Side Accountability Act. It included mandatory body cam audits, public complaint transparency, and a civilian-led oversight board chaired by none other than Judge Thompson. But the reform came at a cost. Thompson's family had been living under federal protection since the trial. Threats came daily. Letters, phone calls, anonymous notes slipped under his office door. One message, scrawled in red marker, read, "You humiliated a good cop. You'll be next." He refused to be intimidated. "If I stop now," he told Rivera, "the message dies. And so do all the kids who never got their day in court. He pushed forward, presiding over new hearings involving police misconduct. Each case felt like opening an old wound. But this time, the city was watching. People who once feared speaking up began stepping forward. Parents, former officers, victims. The courthouse had turned into a confession booth for Chicago's conscience. Meanwhile, Malik Carter and his mother Vanessa received long-delayed justice. The city settled their civil lawsuit for $12 million, the largest wrongful death payout in years, at the press conference. Vanessa spoke through tears. "No amount of money can bring Jamal back," she said, "but it means his name finally means something again," standing beside her. Malik held his brother's journal, the same one that exposed Harlan's past, and said, "My brother used to write that someday the truth would make noise. I guess today it finally did." The crowd applauded. Thompson watched the footage that evening, alone in his chambers, and smiled quietly. "Your brother was right, Malik," he whispered. "The truth does make noise, but only when people stop whispering." Ryan Patel, the journalist who had risked his career to expose the story, won a National Press Award for investigative reporting. When asked during an interview how it felt, he said, "It doesn't feel like a win, it feels like a warning. Justice isn't permanent, it's rented, and you have to keep paying for it." His words struck Thompson deeply. He invited Patel to speak at a courthouse reform panel, where both men agreed that change was only beginning. "We don't need heroes," Thompson told the audience. "We need systems that don't depend on them." But not everyone welcomed the new era. Inside the police force, resentment brewed. Anonymous letters circulated, calling Thompson the judge who betrayed the badge. Some officers staged silent walkouts during roll call, muttering that the city had turned on them, yet quietly. A younger generation of recruits began voicing something new, hope, at the police academy. An instructor asked cadets why they wanted to serve. One young woman raised her hand and said, "Because justice doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone." Her words later appeared on the academy's recruitment wall. Harlan's downfall had become legend. Inside prison, he kept to himself, haunted by the silence of isolation. One morning, a guard found him sitting at the edge of his bunk, writing a letter to Judge Thompson. It began, "I see now what I refused to see. Fear made me cruel. Pride made me blind. If I ever had power, I used it wrong. I don't ask for forgiveness, only that my failure serves as a warning to others." The letter was mailed but never answered. Thompson read it once, folded it neatly, and locked it away in a drawer. When Rivera asked why, he said, "Because forgiveness without accountability is just forgetfulness." Weeks later, the mayor's office held a ceremony announcing new leadership within the Chicago Police Department. The new chief, a black woman named Alicia Vaughn, stood beside Thompson as cameras rolled. "We're not here to erase the past," she said firmly. "We're here to outgrow it." Her appointment marked the first time in city history that the department was led by someone who had marched in the same protests it once tried to silence. Yet even as reforms began to take root, Thompson never let himself grow complacent. He refused offers for a federal judgeship in Washington. Despite calls from Congress praising his integrity, "Chicago is home," he told his wife over the phone one night, "and home doesn't heal when you leave it behind." His voice softened. "Besides, the fight isn't over. It's just quieter." As months passed, crime rates in South Side dropped 15%. Youth programs funded by the city's new accountability budget began teaching law and ethics to teenagers who once feared the police. Lena Jenkins joined the board, advocating for community mentorship. Maya, now 14, stood on a stage at the dedication of the Jamal Carter Memorial Garden and said, "I used to think justice was just something adults talked about. Now I know it's something we build together." Thompson stood in the audience, eyes glistening. That night, alone in his chambers, he turned off the lights, looked out over the darkened city skyline, and whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what change sounds like. Not loud, not fast, but real." For the first time in a long time, he felt peace. Not because the battle was won, but because the right fight had finally begun. Months passed, but the echoes of that courtroom still lived in the heart of Chicago. What had begun as a single slap had grown into a movement, a wave of reform that no one could have predicted. Judge Elijah Thompson no longer carried the same exhaustion he once did. Each morning when he walked into the courthouse, he was greeted by people who now saw justice not as a dream, but as something that could finally belong to them. The marble floors that once felt cold beneath his feet now carried the steps of students, activists, and volunteers attending workshops about civic duty and law. The South Side Accountability Act had begun to reshape the city's culture from the inside out. Thompson spent most of his days mentoring young people who once feared the system. Among them was Maya Jenkins, now a confident 14-year-old, her eyes still cautious but filled with strength. She had begun speaking at schools about her experience. Justice isn't what happens in a courtroom, she told other kids. It's what happens when you stop being silent. Thompson attended one of her speeches quietly from the back of the room, and when she finished, he smiled. "You found your voice," he told her afterward. Maya nodded proudly. "You taught me not to bow to fear." It was the same lesson his father had once tried to teach him, and hearing it echoed back by a child made it feel like a full circle of healing. Outside, the Jamal Carter Memorial Garden had become a place of peace. Malik and his mother, Vanessa, tended it every weekend, planting new flowers for each victim whose name had surfaced during the investigation. Thompson often visited without notice, sitting quietly near the fountain engraved with the words, "Truth has no expiration date." One afternoon, Vanessa saw him there and approached with gentle gratitude. "You could have left." "Judge," she said softly, "you could have taken that federal seat and started over somewhere easier." Thompson shook his head. "Justice doesn't need escape. It needs endurance." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then maybe my son's death wasn't in vain." He looked at her kindly. "No, Vanessa. Because of Jamal. The city finally opened its eyes. In prison. Derek Harlan lived in near isolation, once loud and arrogant. He had grown silent, writing daily in a small notebook. Months later, a letter arrived at Thompson's office, written in careful script. "Judge Thompson, I've had time to think about what I became. You were right. I mistook fear for duty and hate for strength. I won't ask forgiveness, but I hope the system I once poisoned can still heal." Thompson read it quietly, then folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as before. Rivera noticed his silence. "You're not going to reply?" he asked. Thompson shook his head. "Justice is change, Alex, not correspondence if he's finally learned. That's enough." Ryan Patel's reporting continued to inspire national reform. Across the country, cities began reviewing their police oversight laws, citing Chicago's transformation as a model. When asked during a televised interview how it all began, Patel said, "It started with a child who refused to lower her gaze and a judge who refused to lower his standards." The words went viral, sparking a wave of civic campaigns encouraging citizens to film misconduct, attend hearings, and participate in policy reform. It wasn't just Chicago anymore. It had become a movement of conscience spreading across states. Late one evening, as Thompson prepared to leave his chambers, he found Dorothy Brooks, the 70-year-old retired teacher who had attended every day of the trial, waiting in the hall with a stack of papers. "I'm collecting your story." "Judge," she said with a gentle smile, "our students need to know what courage looks like when it doesn't wear a cape." He chuckled softly. Make sure you write it honestly. Heroes make mistakes. 2. Dorothy nodded. That's what makes them real. That same week, the city council renamed the Cook County Family Court building as the Elijah Thompson Center for Justice. During the ceremony, Thompson stood at the podium, humbled but resolute. This building isn't mine, he said. It belongs to every person who ever believed their voice didn't matter. Let this place remind us that silence feeds injustice, but courage, no matter how small, can break it apart. The crowd rose in applause, not for a man, but for the principle he stood for. As the sun set over the city that evening, Thompson returned home to find a letter slipped under his door. It was from Maya, written in her neat teenage handwriting. Because of you, I want to study law. Maybe one day. I'll sit where you sit. Thank you for believing that a scared girl could still be worth listening to. He smiled, reading it twice, then looked out the window at the city lights shimmering below. That's the legacy, he murmured. Not the rulings, the people. Outside. The city was quieter now. Protests had turned into programs, anger into action, and fear into dialogue. The crime rate had dropped. But more importantly, trust had begun to grow. The same courthouse that once symbolized division now represented possibility. Thompson knew the work would never truly end. But for the first time in decades, he felt hope. He locked his office, stepped into the cool night air, and walked past the bronze plaque by the courthouse entrance. It bore his own words, etched in steel. Justice isn't revenge, it's transformation. He touched it lightly, smiled to himself, and whispered, let it keep transforming. Long after I'm gone, then, with the calm dignity that had carried him through every storm. Judge Elijah Thompson walked down the courthouse steps and disappeared into the gentle hum of a city finally learning to heal. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and share. Your voice keeps justice alive.